And we're going to start with my colleague, Becky Maden, who's been doing awesome work trying to understand nutrient management in high tunnels. Take it away, Becky.
Thanks, Vern. Miss seeing everyone in person, but it's a great day with a lot of information. So many of you know we've been working on this 2-year study on nutrient management in high tunnels, and this is really a teaser. I'm putting together a more comprehensive summary and guide from this research, and we're really hoping this is a platform for more comprehensive high tunnel research heading off into the future here. But the quick spoiler, as we all know, is that high tunnels really crank on yield, and that's why we're growing in them. They protect us from weather, they optimize this growing environment with a higher density of plants. They allow us to grow varieties we couldn't grow outdoors, they protect us from diseases and give us a longer season. So as a result, our study found that in Vermont and parts of Maine, Massachusetts, and New York, we had tunnels yielding 14 times more marketable fruit inside a tunnel than what is reported to the National Agricultural Statistics in the field. So an acre of high tunnel tomatoes should yield roughly 71 tons of marketable fruit, which is about $500,000 per acre, versus field tomatoes, which yield about 5 tons per acre. And you all know the difference there. And in order to support that yield, we really have to think ahead and optimize this growing space. So before anything else happens, we're thinking about soil as well as all the other high tunnel variables going into it. And we want to adjust our inputs to support that yield. Our work was built on a 2018 study many of you participated in, or perhaps you remember that was a collaboration across New England, scanning 20 different tunnels. And this study really brought into play the practices and the wide diversity of practices, including varieties, pruning, spacing, greenhouse types, planting date. And there's just a huge variety of growers, anyone from planting into a teeny tiny skinny tunnel into like a huge tunnel with all the bells and whistles. And how do we account for those variables with a nutrient recommendation? You can't just pull out the New England Vegetable Management Guide and say, oh, you need this amount of nitrogen per acre. It really has to be informed by what the grower's yield goal is. And that was the huge take home from this project. So Vern and Katie Campbell Nelson and Bruce Hoskins really honed in on this chart, specifying nutrient recommendations based on yield goals. This is an example of nitrogen. They also created one for phosphorus and potassium. And you might look at this and be like, well, who the heck wants a low yield? Nobody wants a low yield, but somebody might want to grow a determinate tomato in a high tunnel for a very short amount of time. And that is a low yielding plant versus the person who's growing in a heated high tunnel on a grafted plant, maintaining it and hoping to harvest for 4 to 6 months. That's a high yield. And we have to tailor the nutrients to reflect that. Another way to think about this is biomass. When I look at a determinate tomato growing in a tunnel, I can see that there's a lot less biomass and a lot less pruning and foliage being removed. So it's fairly intuitive. But although these recommendations were created, nobody was really trying them out. So Vern and I decided that we wanted to test them out and approached over 50 farms to ask them to try these recommendations. And fortunately for us, the University of Maine lab was using them. They're a great partner. We were able to have Bruce generate the recommendations and ask folks to apply it. And I want to emphasize that this is a grower-informed research project. So we were leaning on the farms to fill out an intake form with their practices, the dates they were planting, everything from A to Z. And then we used that information to help generate their nutrient recommendations, hopefully tailored to what their end goal was. We were also leaning on the farms to report back on yield and quality, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We also went to 5 additional farms and visited them monthly to take soil and tissue samples to get a better sense of what was happening. And just to give you a quick snapshot, a lot of you guys know this, but the 2 metrics we were using to help inform this work is a soil test and we recommend this combination of a field soil test, which is also the modified Morgan's, which measures reserve nutrients, and then a saturated media extract test, which measures what's immediately available when you pop that plant in the ground. Those huge tomato transplants are ready to jump and run out of the pot. So you want to know both things. And so if you're not already doing a soil test, University of Maine does it. Other labs do. This is a great way to help get your nutrients in line before you plant. And then tissue tests will tell you what the plant's actually taking up. And that is really valuable information. And you can pair that with the soil tests to help see. Again, this is a little bit of a teaser because we have a lot of great information from this project. But the really big take home for me was, again, this diversity of growers out there who participated. So some people have just been kind of like sticking plants in the ground in a tunnel, adding some compost, maybe taking a soil test, maybe not. And they really benefited from this project. And new growers also benefited from this project, I think, reporting up to 50% yield increases. And even growers who are top notch and have been paying good attention, just the boost in nutrients recommended through these revisions also helped. The other cool thing was that between the 2 years of the study, 2020 and 2021, we saw an increase in the average yield of participants. And I think that has a lot to do with residual carryover from year to year and nutrients, but also the attention people are paying when they participate in a project like that. So all of my nagging and asking for information, what's your yield, what's this? I think I don't mean to say that nagging helps, but I think attention does, and hopefully a little bit of extra support does as well. So we did see this yield increase, and obviously it's a different growing season as well, but that was exciting. Also, if you look at the data from this, you can really tell that practices have a huge impact on yield. So the density per square foot really generates like a higher yield if you're planting more densely. So that's a humbling thought. It doesn't really matter about nutrients if your density is not spot on. Tissue tests are really good at reflecting the nutrient uptake, and synergistically with that, fertigation can help reverse and change those trends pretty quickly. And finally, potassium continues to be the most challenging nutrient we're finding in tunnels. So out of this, we're recommending to really focus on what you want. We can't say to growers, here's the perfect recommendation for tunnel tomatoes. Growers have to say, well, here's my harvest window, here's the type of plant I'm planting. And all of that intake information is going to be really helpful. So for this year, we're going to have an intake form for people to fill out, or even just a conversation to help tailor those nutrient recommendations. Again, potassium, pH is something that just, side note, that creeps up quickly. Fertigation, I'd say if you can invest $100 in this kind of rinky-dink Mazzy setup, it's just a pretty simple and crude, but it delivers the nutrients to the plants, and it seems to really help. And finally, irrigation is really critical. And we can talk a lot about this, but what's it look like? So I'm going to show you two different tunnels in the study. This is one exemplary tunnel. They have a big, huge ventilated tunnel. They invest a lot in bed prep and soil fertility ahead of time, and they're putting grafted tomato plants, a lot of attention to pruning and cultural practices, and they're harvesting a ton of fruit. I don't know if you guys can see the bottom of the slide there or not, but can you see it, Vern? I think the average, I can't read the average. Is it 7?
The average is 6.7 pounds per square foot.
Great. So it's a hugely yielding tunnel, as opposed to this one, which is a really great grower. It's a less well ventilated tunnel with a lot less time on their hands to manage it. And even though they said they applied the nutrients that were specified in the study, the soil tests and tissue tests did not reflect that. So my guess is that there was something lost in translation and the plants suffered. So these are also hybrids. They're not grafted, but they're Rebelski and Big Dina. They should have been performing much better, and they're not. And the other important thing is markets really matter. So some of these tunnels in our study did these beautiful crops of tomatoes, and then they're like, oh, we just do a roadside stand and we're pretty much done at Labor Day. And they ripped out plants with tons of green fruit, which was humbling from the perspective of running a study for our yield data, but also from the perspective of how can we do better to plan that to fit your market window and not, not have that lag at the end.
And that was 1.3 pounds per square foot. People couldn't see it.
Yeah, pretty low yielding.
So a five-fold spread across those two tunnels, that's a lot.
And the investments up front, you know, the labor was probably different, but you know, a lot went into both tunnels. And then, you know, you can have the best nutrients in the world, but just a reminder, other things can happen, right? Powdery mildew, sun scald, hornworms, botrytis, leaf mold, you name it. That's why we have Ann and Chris and Vern and everyone else helping. And then just some improvements. And this is like a whole other conversation. But again, the reminder that good ventilation, adequate irrigation, and cultural practices also make a huge difference. So feel free to be in touch as your tests come in this season. So thanks.
Thank you, Becky. Great job packing a complex multi-year study into just a few minutes. If people do have questions, put them in the chat. I know Becky will be around to respond to them as well. And you'll be seeing a compilation of the data forthcoming in not too distant future.